"Get this homeless man away from here." The voice was sharp, a whip-crack of entitlement in the sterile hush of the Naval Hospital's VIP waiting area. Lieutenant Cade Jennings, all starched whites and polished brass, pointed a manicured finger at the old man sitting quietly in the corner. "Now, this is a secure area for Admiral Hayes, not a shelter." The man in question didn't flinch. He sat on the edge of a vinyl chair, his back ramrod straight in a way that seemed at odds with his frayed denim jacket and boots that had clearly seen more miles than the lieutenant's entire fleet. His hands, gnarled and weathered, rested on his knees. They were still, utterly still. He looked tired, yes, but not in the way a man defeated by life looks tired. It was a deeper weariness, the kind etched into the soul by sights the young lieutenant couldn't possibly imagine. His eyes, a pale, washed-out blue, were fixed on the double doors of the emergency room where the Admiral had just been wheeled on a gurney, clutching his chest. They weren't vacant eyes. They were assessing, calculating, absorbing every detail with an unnerving economy of movement. Jennings, frustrated by the lack of immediate compliance from the hospital corpsman he'd barked at, took a step towards the old man himself. "Did you hear me? I said get out. This area is off-limits to civilians, especially—" "Your kind?" The insult hung in the air, thick and unpleasant. The old man slowly turned his head, his gaze shifting from the ER doors to the lieutenant's flushed, angry face. He said nothing. The silence was more powerful than any retort. It was a silence born of immense patience, of having faced down far worse things than an arrogant officer puffed up with temporary authority. In that quiet moment, another man stepped forward. Master Chief Petty Officer David Chen, the Admiral's long-serving senior enlisted leader, placed a calm hand on the lieutenant's arm. Chen was a man carved from granite and wisdom, his face a roadmap of deployments and long watches. He had seen 100 officers like Jennings come and go. "Lieutenant, ease up," he said, his voice a low rumble. "The man's not hurting anything. Let's focus on the Admiral." Jennings shook off the hand. His pride stung. "With all due respect, Master Chief, I am in charge of the Admiral's security, and that includes ensuring his environment is clear of potential threats and vagrants. Now, either you can convince him to leave, or I'll have the shore patrol do it for me." He turned back to the old man, his voice dripping with condescension. "That medal on your jacket," he sneered, gesturing to a small tarnished pin almost hidden in the worn fabric. "Is that supposed to be a Purple Heart? You probably bought it at a pawn shop. Stolen valor is a federal offense, you know?" Master Chief Chen felt a cold knot tighten in his gut. He had been watching the old man, too, but where Jennings saw a vagrant, Chen saw something else entirely. He saw the posture. It wasn't the slump of the destitute, it was the at-ease posture of a man who had spent a lifetime in a state of coiled readiness. It was a posture that conserved energy while maintaining total situational awareness. He saw the way the man's eyes tracked the medical staff, not with idle curiosity but with a professional, critical gaze. They weren't just looking, they were evaluating. Then Chen saw the hands again. Gnarled, yes, but the fingernails were clean, clipped short, and practical. And as the man shifted slightly, the cuff of his worn flannel shirt rode up his forearm, revealing a sliver of faded ink. It wasn't a skull or an anchor. It was a complex, intricate design Chen had only seen once before, in a classified briefing years ago. It was the insignia of a ghost unit, a Tier 1 Special Operations medical detachment so secret that its members were said to be sheep-dipped, their records scrubbed clean. They were the saviors who went where no one else could, the battlefield surgeons who performed miracles in the dark, under fire, with nothing but what they could carry on their backs. Chen's breath caught in his throat. It couldn't be. Those men were legends, myths whispered about in hushed tones in forward operating bases. They were all thought to be long gone, retired, or buried in unmarked graves. He looked from the faded tattoo back to the man's calm, weathered face. And suddenly, it all clicked into place. The stillness wasn't weakness. It was control. The silence wasn't ignorance, it was discipline. This man wasn't a threat, he was a guardian angel in disguise. "Lieutenant," Chen said again, his voice now laced with an urgency that Jennings completely missed. "Sir, I strongly advise you to stand down. Let the man be." But Jennings was too far gone, lost in his own power trip. "I don't need your advice, Master Chief. I need this area cleared." He stepped right up to the old man, invading his personal space, his voice rising. "This is your final warning. Get up and get out, or you'll be leaving in handcuffs." The old man finally looked away from the ER doors and met the lieutenant's glare. He still said nothing, but his pale blue eyes seemed to look straight through Jennings, weighing and measuring him and finding him utterly insignificant. The sheer, unadulterated confidence in that silent gaze was more intimidating than any threat. It was the look of a lion being annoyed by a yapping dog. Just as Jennings opened his mouth to call for the shore patrol, a new sound cut through the tension, the piercing, frantic shriek of a heart monitor from behind the ER doors. A nurse burst out, her face pale with panic. "He's coding! Admiral Hayes is in VFib! We need a crash cart in here now!" Chaos erupted. Doctors and nurses scrambled, their voices overlapping in a cacophony of medical jargon and urgent commands. Master Chief Chen and Lieutenant Jennings rushed to the doorway, peering in. The scene was one of controlled panic. Admiral Hayes was convulsing on the gurney, his face a deathly shade of gray. A young resident, barely older than Jennings, was fumbling with the defibrillator paddles, his hands shaking. "I can't get a clear rhythm," he shouted. "His chest isn't rising with the bag. Something's blocking his airway." The senior doctor was trying to secure an IV line, but the Admiral's veins had collapsed. Time was running out. Each passing second felt like an eternity, the steady beep of the monitor having been replaced by a flat, terrifying tone. It was the sound of a great man's life slipping away. Then, a blur of motion. The old man was on his feet. He didn't rise. He uncoiled, moving with a fluid grace that defied his age and appearance. In 2 long strides, he was at the ER doors, shedding his worn denim jacket as he moved. He dropped it to the floor without a second glance, revealing the lean, wiry frame of a man forged in hardship. The full tattoo was visible now on his forearm, a caduceus entwined with a combat knife, piercing a skull, the mark of a legend. He moved past the stunned Lieutenant Jennings as if he were a statue, his voice cutting through the chaos like a surgeon's scalpel, calm, absolute, and radiating an authority that silenced everyone in the room. "He's not blocked. He's got a tension pneumothorax, probably from a fractured rib during transport. His left lung has collapsed, and it's putting pressure on his heart. You're trying to restart a heart that's being crushed in his chest." He pointed a steady finger at a terrified-looking nurse. "You, get me a 14-gauge angiocath and a sterile wipe. Now." The nurse, shocked out of her paralysis, simply nodded and ran. He turned to the young resident. "Stop playing with those paddles. Charge them to 200 joules and wait for my command. You," he said to another corpsman, "maintain the airway, but don't force it. Gentle pressure." The medical staff, from the senior doctor down to the junior corpsman, instinctively obeyed. There was no question, no hesitation. The quiet old man had transformed into a field commander, and this chaotic ER was now his battlefield. Lieutenant Jennings stood frozen in the doorway, his mouth hanging open, his face a mask of disbelief and dawning horror. Master Chief Chen simply stood beside him, watching with a sense of profound awe. The nurse returned with the needle. The old man took it, his gnarled hands now moving with the impossible delicacy of a master craftsman. Palpating the second intercostal space, mid-clavicular line, he murmured, more to himself than anyone else, his fingers expertly finding the precise location on the Admiral's chest. He didn't hesitate. With a single, swift, practiced motion, he plunged the large-bore needle into the Admiral's chest. A distinct hiss, like air escaping a punctured tire, filled the room. On the monitor, the Admiral's blood pressure, which had flatlined, suddenly jumped. A weak, thready pulse returned. "He's back," the old man stated. "Now hit him." The young resident, his hands no longer shaking, placed the paddles on the Admiral's chest. "Clear!" he yelled. The Admiral's body jumped as the electricity coursed through him. On the screen, the jagged, chaotic line of ventricular fibrillation converted into a steady, rhythmic sine wave. A collective sigh of relief filled the room. The Admiral was alive. Just then, a tall, imposing figure in surgical scrubs pushed through the crowd. It was Captain Mark Peterson, the hospital's chief of surgery, drawn by the code blue alert. He took in the scene at a glance: the stabilized Admiral, the stunned but relieved medical team, and the unassuming old man in a worn flannel shirt who was now calmly issuing post-resuscitation orders. "Let's get him on a dopamine drip to support his pressure and prep him for the cath lab. I want a full cardiac panel and a chest X-ray to confirm the pneumo." Captain Peterson's eyes narrowed, focusing on the old man. There was something familiar about that weathered face, about the impossible calm in the middle of a storm. He took a step closer, his gaze falling to the unique tattoo on the man's forearm. The captain's eyes widened, first in recognition, then in utter, profound disbelief. He looked back at the man's face, the pieces of a half-forgotten legend slotting into place. His entire demeanor changed, the stern authority of a chief of surgery melting away into something akin to reverence, the way a student would address a master. "My God," he whispered, his voice barely audible. "It is you, Dr. Finch? Dr. Alistair Finch?" The name fell into the stunned silence of the room like a thunderclap. Lieutenant Jennings felt the blood drain from his face. He felt cold, sick. Dr. Alistair the Ghost Finch. He wasn't just a doctor, he was a living myth. A surgeon who had volunteered for the most dangerous special operations units in the world. He had pioneered techniques in battlefield medicine that were now standard procedure, techniques that had saved thousands of lives. He wrote the definitive textbook on austere environment trauma surgery, a book that was required reading for every combat medic and Navy SEAL corpsman. He had been awarded the Distinguished Service Cross, multiple Silver Stars, and a Purple Heart so significant it was rumored he'd performed surgery on himself to save the rest of his team. Then, 20 years ago, after his wife passed away, he had simply vanished. He resigned his commission, turned down lucrative university positions, and disappeared from public life entirely, leaving behind nothing but the legend. And Lieutenant Cade Jennings had just called him a homeless man, accused him of stolen valor, and threatened to have him arrested. He wanted the floor to swallow him whole. Captain Peterson turned, his eyes burning with a cold fire as they landed on Jennings. "Lieutenant," he said, his voice dangerously low, "do you have any idea who this is? This man forgot more about medicine in a single day than most doctors learn in a lifetime. He just performed a flawless needle thoracostomy with no ultrasound, no hesitation, and saved the life of your Admiral. A procedure, I might add, that half of my attending physicians would be terrified to attempt outside of a fully prepped operating room. And you, what exactly were you doing? I heard you from my office. You were trying to have him thrown out." Jennings couldn't speak. His throat was tight, his mind a swirling vortex of shame and terror. He could only stand there, mute, as his career and self-respect crumbled into dust. On the gurney, Admiral Hayes stirred, his eyes fluttering open. He was weak, disoriented, but alive. His gaze fell upon the old man standing beside him, the man in the worn flannel shirt. The Admiral's own eyes, though clouded with pain, widened slightly. He knew the stories. Every flag officer knew the legend of Alistair Finch. With a great effort, he lifted a trembling hand, not in a salute, but in a simple, profound gesture of gratitude. Dr. Finch took the Admiral's hand in his own, giving it a gentle squeeze. It was a moment of quiet connection, a silent acknowledgement between two old warriors. Master Chief Chen, who had watched the entire scene unfold, felt a swell of emotion in his chest, a mixture of pride, relief, and profound respect. He walked forward, stopping directly in front of Dr. Finch. He didn't say a word. He simply drew himself up to his full height, his back ramrod straight, and rendered the slowest, most precise, most heartfelt salute of his entire 30-year career. It wasn't a salute to a doctor. It was a salute to a hero, a warrior, a silent guardian who had walked out of the shadows when he was needed most. Dr. Finch met his gaze and gave a slight, almost imperceptible nod of acknowledgement. Then, as quietly as he had appeared, he began to fade back into the background. He retrieved his old denim jacket from the floor, shrugging it on. The legendary surgeon, the ghost of the battlefield, disappeared beneath the guise of the unassuming old man once more. Without another word to anyone, he turned and walked out of the emergency room, his worn boots making no sound on the polished linoleum floor. He melted into the sterile corridors of the hospital, and was gone. Lieutenant Jennings was left alone in the aftermath, standing in the ruins of his own arrogance, the weight of his mistake crushing him. He would face a formal reprimand, but he knew the real punishment was the memory of the quiet old man's eyes and the gut-wrenching knowledge that he had stood in the presence of greatness and had been utterly, shamefully blind.